And next we have the spicy SGX panel with Andrew, Jonathan, and Phil. So I guess
Uh,
I'll just go ahead with the segue. So I guess the fact that we don't have this Merkle tree kind of memory integrity with the new versions of SGX, is that kind of a deal breaker almost for Suave, whereby Suave is meant to be reasonably decentralized and trustless, and now we're saying that the enclaves might need to be run in Google Cloud, or like what is going on here?
I mean, even if there's no integrity checks, it's possible to do mitigations from the applications that are using it, but that would require being very careful about it. And it's not really just integrity, because if you could, tamper with the memory while an enclave program's running, you could end up tampering with, some access control things that it's doing. So it could affect privacy as well as integrity in that case too. But I mean, broadly, that's something that can be mitigated. I mean, your kind of line of defense would be to add your own integrity kind of checking, from registers that don't get paged out. The kind of related question to this, I kind of most was excited to respond to, is about like the kind of difference between like the cloud use cases and the client use cases. So like the client use cases are clearly being deprecated, no longer supported. But I mean, the origin of SGX was like for like Blu-ray players and digital restrictions management, anti-user technology. I mean, so that was the first time when everyone began hating trusted platform modules. Richard Stallman would have huge rants about this. So like everyone hated trusted hardware from before then because of that really despicable use. So I think good riddance to the client side, SGX ones. The cloud services, though, are like really getting a lot of use out of this and really want it. So I don't see that going away. Like Xeon processors are still going to be supporting SGX of some kind. They really need the integrity checks, too. So that's not like a thing that's just not on their radar at all. And I don't think that I think the real challenge is how the decentralized blockchain applications will be able to like blend in with the cloud use cases and act like good customers and not do something that gets them, cleft out from the kind of support that the cloud services get.
Yeah, I mean, I do think in terms of Suave, like obviously any product change to Intel SGX like affects the plausible deployments. I will say like Suave does not require perfect privacy or integrity necessarily. The goal of using SGX and Suave is like partially as defense in depth to iterate the status quo. It's not the same as, let's say, using SGX for consensus or something like that, in that like if you do manage to break SGX and perform any of these attacks, like you'll be able to kind of get an advantage in MEV, which certainly might be profitable for a short term until people notice. But it's not really the same as having your secrets kind of permanently leaked to the world, or your consensus protocol falling over and losing billions or something like that. I think this is like part of the loss of subtlety in like the SGX world, is people love to have like very binary views on SGX, like either it's broken or not, either it has integrity or it doesn't, either like you can use it or you can't, either it's applicable to blockchains or it isn't. And to me, there's like a lot more subtlety in terms of like what specifically are you using it for, and does it kind of stand up to that use case. So a few things is like, number one, in terms of blockchains, I do think there are still blockchain use cases, specifically in stopping a lot of these actors that like, maybe are a little bit stronger than honest but curious, like rational but curious actors, from kind of having as much incentive to get an edge. And I think for that, it actually could work really well, no matter, even if the barrier is small, even if the iterated game is messy, like it still could work well. And even if that kind of guarantee fails once in a while, if like a really kind of sophisticated attack gets pulled off. So that's like my general answer for Suave for like all of this. Of course, as Jonathan said in his talk, we aren't like SGX maxis or anything. It's just part of defense in depth. Would love to like explore other TEEs. Would also love to have FHE, and although I think some separate spicy panel to be had there on like the gap between kind of where we're at today and where we need to be to like actually, in my opinion, be usable. So maybe I ranted too much. I guess one more thing, Andrew's question about how blockchain slips into the cloud stream. Like, I don't see why we wouldn't be able to do that. It seems like a lot of what people are looking at SGX for is like privacy preserving machine learning and things like that. There seems to be an analog in like this real-time financial optimization to like cooperative AI, to like privacy preserving AI. So you could possibly see all these use cases like converging in some way. And also, I think the nice thing about MEV specifically is it's like a constant real-time problem. So like, whereas a machine learning problem like Android key swipes or signal contacts or whatever other machine learning problems you might have, you kind of like do it once or like do it a few times or once in a while. Here you have to be doing it constantly, and the more computation you have, the more you're doing it. So really, Intel should love that, in my opinion, if like their business is to sell hardware. So maybe that's how we like slip in by just kind of making demand for their product real.
Yeah, that would be welcome, I guess, because I think like one of the pragmatic challenges as well is that, you know, it's pretty much only Azure as of today that gives you all the flavors of it that you would like. So it's not great either for decentralization to just like take it from the ends of Intel to put it in the hands of.
Yeah, you did lag a little, Jonathan. I don't know if it was just me, but I think yeah,
Probably
I
like,
agree.
yeah.
Yeah, I agree with the sentiment.
And people are lazy and love clouds, but there's nothing stopping you from getting an IKEA rack and hosting your own Xeon processor. It's not like they're completely out of range.
Yeah, and if you're an MEV searcher and you want to do a lot of this like local, like wide scale optimization, it seems reasonable to like in the long term, you know, you're basically an infrastructure provider for crypto. So having like some server grade hardware seems reasonable to me. Again, not to say it's the ideal status quo where obviously we'd have magical encryption, but I think maybe this is another spicy take. Like it seems like all the alternatives to SGX introduce other gotchas for blockchains to me. So like MPC being the most practical example. MPC has like scalability issues in like the size of the committee. It has like a really high bandwidth requirement. And also it's like much more efficient if you have low latency or if you can like co-locate. So all these to me seem to be like equally bad to like sometimes breaks if like Intel screws up and or someone spends like a few million on some like really good PhDs. But maybe I'm wrong. That's just my spicy take.
Robert covered a bunch of those in his talk, some of those challenges with it. I mean, a lot of the most optimized ones, and this is kind of the thing that we found. We've been doing this Ratel project. There's a post about it that's like our MP speeds on Uniswap kind of AMM. And it's an AMM because that's the most complicated thing we can basically get to work that's practical with MP speeds, like a really simple operation. And it was, you know, a challenge even to do that. And, you know, we wanted some notion of like robustness, like availability. So that's just what you expect with a, you know, a blockchain system, but that's not the most desirable operating system. MPC people tend to prefer the maximum privacy, and they'll have systems that just topple over if any node fails. So all of like the really hot, interesting protocols where they're making the big speed improvements are mostly in the dishonest majority or N out of N sharing setting. And then those just aren't applicable if you want something that kind of acts like a blockchain with its redundancy and fault tolerance.
On the topic of fault tolerance, I have a question for Phil about Suave. Like, presumably there isn't like one master T that's, you know, running Suave. There's like some amount of redundancy, and in that context, if one of the Ts is compromised and breaks privacy, like how do you detect which? And you know, we observe front running happening. How do we, you know, narrow down who to kick out of the committee of TE operators?
Yeah, so this is a great question. And the truthful answer is we don't know yet. So we have kind of like the privacy abstraction for Suave and like a few deployment scenarios with trade-offs. I don't think we know exactly what we're going to go with. So we'll probably have more kind of community conversations about what makes sense there. You know, the trade-off kind of being from like more distribution, but like less attribution and like wider attack surface to like more centrality and or layering, even like reputation or committees, that would, in my opinion, be bad, but you know, we'll put it on the table. So like, these are like the ranges of like options you have on who to run it. Certainly one central party is not good. So like, we might as well just not, I mean, I guess it adds a little defense in depth to trusting flashbots, but we definitely want more than one. And they should be like different economically kind of separate parties that provide like competition and diversity. So that would be like the bare minimum. Ideally, we distribute it so like everyone's phone runs a swap node and like the whole thing is like this chaotic global process. Same with ETH, right? Like the dream is to have that phone validator, and like practically you probably land somewhere like in the middle as you like strive for that thing, I would imagine.
Okay, understood.
I really liked with Suave that you know, that Suave has this goal of using you know, enclaves for this disintermediation goal. Like, you really want to use it, like you'll run this in order to prove to all the people that are using this system that you don't have the ability to, you know, tamper with it. I think that's really cool. That's kind of rare in the SGX, I think, kind of application where like people seem to be really satisfied with just getting their own data results back and not trying to, you know, prove that they don't have these centralized controls left. So it's just really cool to know that. That makes me think that the SGX based like blockchains, and you have that as a common goal, and maybe, you know, some progress can get done. I think no one's really done this kind of end-to-end job of looking at the entire like chain of validation. You can't just say there is remote attestation. You have to have some process by which people in your community are actually looking at the remote attestations. For the sake of a spicy take here, right, the same issue is like with Arbitrum and other L2s. Like, they're built around a very complicated you know, audit protocol that handles the edge cases when something goes wrong and you need to process a fraud proof. But it's hard to go find like visible, you know, examples of that and follow that process and see it working. That's something that's not unique to the SGX space, but that, you know, everyone should probably do a better job of, you know, validating their source code and publishing their transparency information where it's usable. But it's especially needed for this use of SGX. And maybe you'll solve these problems if you need them for Suave, and everyone else can use them too.
I have a fun, even spicier take, which is a little bit of a troll take, which is that like, luckily we have no on-chain privacy in Ethereum, so you can also use like funds flow to do a lot of your, you know, statistical analysis and stuff like that. Like, that's how you back out centralized exchanges cheating. So like, you would have these same tools in MEV land. Like, if you were getting bad execution, you know, you could see like who sandwiched you on the chain, or like, you know, who was accessing. Perhaps in some cases it may be non-attributable, and then like you're really screwed. But I don't know. In many cases, you may be able to kind of divine misbehavior.
So my next question is around latency, and I have a personal story to share. So we recently launched the ultrasound relay, which is this kind of non-censoring relay. And there's actually another non-censoring relay which was launched at the exact same time, the agnostic relay. And we basically have the same setup. We're running, you know, the Flashbots code base. And it turns out that for some reason that we're still investigating, we're simulating blocks roughly 200 milliseconds slower than agnostic. And these 200 milliseconds mean that we have roughly a 2x penalty over agnostic. So we're including on-chain, we're winning the auction like half the time that we should be. And so my question is, you know, if latency is just so important for MEV, like how can SGX win? Because presumably there's some amount of performance overhead. Like maybe you can't do all the fancy overclocking, and you can't get the latest and greatest CPUs and whatnot. Yeah, I'm curious, how do you reconcile latency with SGX?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, first of all, I'm very glad to have you in the relay game. So that's like amazing. Thank you for running a relay. And I also think like part of the challenge in the future is like co-designing the protocol parameters, so you can do things that like have somewhat of a latency penalty if they're like considered qualitatively better, and like maybe because of the way like the timing is structured in the protocol or something, there's like somewhat less of an impact. Obviously, there will always be some edge to having higher latency. That's like not something we can just like magic wand away completely. But yeah, so I would say like number one, we should minimize the latency impact. Number two, we can lean on ways in which the decentralized tech is stronger to compensate for latency. So if you have this like privacy kind of edge that allows you to optimize transactions better for users, and like you can attract more economic activity if you have ability to optimize cross-domain, et cetera, in a decentralized way where people actually trust you to like do this optimization, then maybe like the latency penalty exists, but like it's overcome by these other factors. So like really look at like what is the strengths of the decentralized thing, and can we like amplify those in enough of an edge to mitigate the latency penalty? Because the more decentralized you get, also the more latency penalty. So SGX actually doesn't have that bad of a latency penalty, especially if you provide witnesses. You're basically just executing the EVM with like, you know, not really, you can provide state witnesses, so you don't even need to do any memory swaps in like some cases. That can have like fairly low overhead. Like you said, you do lose overclocking and some other edge enhancements. I think that's within reason. Like there's already a lot of overhead in the building simulation process to kind of get this decentralization and get this merging of many different searchers from around the world with different edges into the most valuable block. So like we're already kind of used to paying this latency for network effect penalty. And I think SGX specifically is okay. I do worry like as we push it more towards FHE or something like that, and or even if we want to do like, we have some magic new MPC protocol with fairness that works, like, and the latency penalty becomes bigger, we would still probably want to switch to that as a community. And how do we make sure that those systems stay competitive? I think that's like an L1 design question also.
Yeah, I think there's two ways to see it as well. Like, if everyone has to pay the same for killing, then creating like an edge to some of the users. So I think the most important thing is to make sure that, you know, if there is such a penalty, everyone should be in the same setting. And in the SGX case, to answer your question, things to be in a somehow is, you know, again, as long as everyone is like in the same setting, I think it's not such of an issue.
Yeah, Jonathan, your audio was a little shaky, but I guess what you were saying.
I'm sorry, my connection is like really bad.
No worries. But I guess, yeah, I guess what you're saying is that if everyone's paying this penalty, then everyone's kind of equal. But I guess what might happen is that we'll see maybe a centralized private mempool, and then Suave, and then someone will do profit switching between the two, and then the centralized one will just always win, because it has not only maybe a lower latency penalty on SGX, but also it doesn't have to deal with the peer-to-peer gossip channel, the blah blah blah. It's like straight, you know, end-to-end TCP connection from one point to another. But yeah, it will be, as you said, Phil, you know, there's a trade-off space, and hopefully the forces lean towards decentralization.
I hope so. Side note, little known fact, this is like one of the reasons we run a centralized builder, so that like A, we're forced to compete with ourselves, and B, that like if we do release something decentralized and we like shut it down, it's kind of like a statement to the community on what we think the protocol should look like, even if there is like a slight dip in profitability for a while. So that's like one of the reasons.
So I guess my next question is around memes. SGX has this bad reputation, which might be warranted or it might not be, but it's kind of there. Like, isn't that a tailwind for adoption? By
Headwind.
Sorry, headwind. Thank you.
Curious to hear Andrew's take on this, and then I'll.
Yeah, it is a headwind. It's weird. I mean, even in like the research publication, it's a lot harder to get like a peer review paper accepted on SGX, because there was a glut of papers that were really boring and just said, here's existing paper. We just forced it to run within SGX and didn't have so much else to say. So there's even just a headwind towards, getting past that. I don't know. I mean, it just seems weird to me. Like, clearly it seems to me that there's more gut reaction, like overvaluing the concerns about it, that it's far swung the other way. I hope it swings even more. Like, I don't know if we're at the bottom of SGX negative sentiment. Maybe we can go even further and catch the drop on the way up. I mean, it must be I mean, my experience is that there's still just a ton of low-hanging fruit of critical stuff to look at. So I get the sense that like very few people are looking at this. I mean, the ones who are get kind of diverted and turned off so quickly that they don't even get to the good bit. So you all are here, and I'm glad to see that you all are working on it that way. So hopefully we can improve that all around. Yeah, it's absolutely like a negative sentiment, but it's an opportunity too.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And also Alex's points in the chat. I think the first crop of SGX companies were very much like, ooh, shiny new tech toy. Like, let's just like plaster this on to like every single problem under the sun and like try to raise money from our VCs, which is like a common pattern in tech. It's like, okay, iPhone comes out with a new notification type. Like, what old UX patterns can we just like plaster this onto and have like a new, fad, basically. It's like the same idea. And I also think that turned a lot of people off. Plus, obviously, there are some fundamental issues. It's the same thing as with crypto, right? Like, there's a lot of people that think crypto is a scam and like F all this, like it's just like all rug pulls and like the tokens are not legit, they're all securities, whatever other argument you might hear. They're all kind of true to an extent, right? Like all the arguments, they wouldn't be memes if they weren't at least a little true. The same way all the bad SGX takes and like all those memes, they are a little true. But like both things I think lack nuance. And so I'm glad, yeah, that we're having this conversation and that there are people working on it, because I think the next generation of companies is not like the shiny thing companies. It's like we have an actual need, and like we've gone down many paths, and there's really no choice for this like weird crypto intersection that's like still better than like something that's fully trusted. And I think in that niche, like there's actually a lot of practical gains to be made. Again, like as a company, like that is we're being very practical about this. We're not like, we are an SGX company, this is our long-term goal is to like SGXize the world. It's just like there's not really a choice. And like, yes, there's a major headwind. That's also an opportunity, because it means like everyone else has the same headwind. And if you're truly convinced that it's the right thing to do and you're correct and you pay the headwind, then like that is what an opportunity is also. So I think it's both. Yeah, very excited about it.
I had a lot of fun talking with a bunch of people that I met, when doing this kind of unsolicited audit of secret networks. So, I mean, it was neat to talk to the Obscura folks. A bunch of projects are using enclaves that don't consider themselves smart contracts, but middleware of some kind. So Fala is one of them. And it's a little confusing because even though they're a middleware, they still are EVM compatible. That didn't make sense to me until Suave is like that. It's not to be a competing blockchain, but it is EVM and running in enclaves for something else. So they're doing something, and the guy from Automata, Network Automata is another middleware one, but they aren't, I don't think they have open source code, but maybe could be talked into it. So yeah, maybe invite all of them to another roast.
It's probably the best way to go against the headwind, is to keep on doing like everything in the open, transparent events, making sure position is well known, and like being the first critics of our own design choices, I think.
Your audio is amazing now, by the way, Jonathan. So whatever you did worked.
So I guess my next question is just trying to assume the worst case, as Andrew put it, which is that this, what if there's a vulnerability that makes all the attestation keys, leak, so that there's just no security guarantees anymore from SGX. What would be the plan for Suave? Is it that you fall back to the current model, I guess? And does it mean that you
kind
might...
of, yeah. I mean,
Go ahead.
Sorry. So yeah, I think there's like a few options that are like really practical from today. You kind of summarize them. There's like decentralized, that's what we have with Flashbots and Flashbots Protect now. Then there's committee-based. You could call this like the chain link-ish trust assumption, something like that. You can layer on some staking and call it decentralized also. You can possibly reuse the ETH validator set. These are all like ideas in that camp, and build some sort of committee where you have like some protocol that aggregates like multiple semi-trusted kind of inputs into like an oracle. You could also do privacy that way, certainly. Either trusting the kind of ore of like all the people you choose to trust and like optimizing their intersection. That's very easy. Or you can use MPC to like trust the end. I don't know if I reverse those or not. I think it's right. So those are like kind of the levels. And so, yeah, we'll have to probably kind of go to one of those options. So probably ultimately the system will be like, you know, some will be configured to allow you to fall back to this if like SGX is broken. It would be sad though. I'm very bearish on committees, and this is why I think SGX is the only choice. Just for the reason that in MEV, given that the breaks aren't falsifiable and the incentives are so high, and there's a kind of positive incentive boost from being on this committee if you're also a searcher or a builder. That to me makes me very bearish on like those trust assumptions actually holding, especially under like stress. So that's why we think SGX can maybe like patch over that, like paper mache over that a little bit. And so I would be sad if we had to like fall back to that, I guess.
I think that there's a very interesting assumption in what you've been saying, Phil, is that we're able to identify this new vulnerability and act accordingly. And I think that that's what happened up until now in SGX, right? It's mostly been academic or white hat hackers that like Andrew's papers that went through the process of like disclosing the vulnerability to Intel so that they could act accordingly, even though we can debate like the update process afterwards. What's maybe more interesting, and I'm not saying I've got an answer to that, is that if the stake becomes so large that some people do not have the incentive anymore to go through this process, but on the other hand to try and exploit these new vulnerabilities that they've discovered, then we could be in troubles, because then you have like this asymmetry again between users that exploit and users that pay the penalty, basically. So, and I think again, like to link back to your paper, it's kind of like interesting to see and try to cost how much it would be to mount such attacks. I think that would be a very interesting line of research to try and estimate the cost of like, you know, breaking this and this aspect of the technology.
Yeah, I've always said that that's what's like a few years ago, that's like what's missing from this whole SGX conversation. Like we don't understand the economics of all exploits. Like it really depends on like the marginal cost to break additional chips, like whether SGX can be secure at all. Like, is that zero for all exploits or no? I don't know. Maybe you know if anyone's done research in this, Andrew or Jonathan, but I'm not at least aware of any.
It's not really my area, but I'm a fanboy of all the people that do this vulnerability research at that level. Have you seen this YouTube from Linus Tech Tips on the like a tour of the Intel debug lab? Debug lab is like the spookiest phrase in the context of SGX, because what debug lab means is they have a big laser thing that'll burn off the top of a production chip. It turns a production Intel processor into an FPGA. They can rewire the logic of the chip by beaming it with powerful lasers in their debug lab. And they gave this little tour of it to a famous YouTuber, and it's nice to put like a picture of it to the myth, you know, the it must exist myth, but you know, that's what it looks like. That doesn't answer the economics question. I've heard people say things like $100,000 is what it would cost to get access to that, or like the one place in University of Florida that can do it, or something like that. So I don't know the details. We should be trying to find those, because that would fit into this kind of analysis.
Yeah, I will say like our one leverage point here is like a lot of this can be punted to Intel. So like they have PR skin in the game. Not that we should, and we shouldn't answer these questions, but they also have skin in the game. And like if someone does build a secret SGX lab to break MEV and they succeed, Intel's PR is on the line as well. So presumably, you know, we can
I think
work
the
together.
relationship between the crypto community, including y'all and the blockchains that are doing this, I think should try to present like a united lobbying block to Intel. So I mean, one of the lessons in the SGX.fail paper, which like Daniel and Christina and others have been kind of tracing down this for, you know, a much longer time. It's a much broader point than just the blockchain setting. But no one understands TCB recovery that well. None of the, you know, relationships and things that you do afterwards, what it takes to get early notification or not, are so clear. So I don't know. My guess is that it's possible to do a better job negotiating and informing this relationship with Intel, you know, by acting as a cohesive community rather than just one-off startup projects.
One of the things that struck me, you know, when you guys gave answers is that you didn't mention AMD SCV as a potential replacement for SGX if SGX is completely broken. Does it mean that SCV is maybe not appropriate for SUAV?
Different threat model. Well, first of all, I think that the TCB is much larger. So that's like, regardless of like the properties of the hardware itself, the question is like whether you want to trust a relatively small application enclave size, or whether you want to trust a whole virtual machine that there's absolutely no loopholes that could be exploited in there. And I guess that also, maybe we should not address all of these technologies under the same name. I'm kind of like, I'm not very happy about, you know, everything falling under the T name. I think a lot of these techs are now becoming just like confidential virtual machines. And we should clearly make the distinction between them two. It's not, it doesn't mean that it's bad fundamentally, but it's like we should not expect the same behavior and like security properties from two different like technologies basically.
Yeah, I would say, like, that being said, like, it could iterate into something useful, like if they see a market demand. And, you know, I'm not like fully bearish on AMD or any other TEEs. Like, it would be great to have more diversity. If we had multiple solutions that worked for the threat model, maybe we could come up with a protocol that like you need to break both to get anywhere, and that would be nice. Certainly, I think, like, in the same vein as like the ASIC for any delay encryption function that EF may do, like maybe one day the EF or other crypto companies together build a TEE that's like open source. If this actually does end up becoming critical infrastructure that we can't replace and the other avenues don't pan out. So these are all like, yes, they're all kind of like on the research radar, but I think, as Jonathan said, like today, less attractive for various reasons. Although we have talked to some people recently who are bullish on AMD kind of eventually being enough for this use case. You could also maybe even jury rig like the iPhone TEEs plus like Apple's authenticity check if you do like a network that has like enough attestations for your economic security. Maybe you could get security out of that. I don't know. But yeah. Things to think about, but I think less immediately obviously applicable than SGX.
Guys, thank you so much for your time. I think we're over an hour and 10 minutes over, so it may be time to wrap up. Thank you so much to all the
Been a
speakers.
blast. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Justin,
Thanks everyone,
for
that was great.
spicy moderation. And yeah, thanks everyone.
That was really great.
Thank you, Justin, to our tireless roastmaster. That was awesome.
Thanks, Sarah, for organizing.
Thank you both. See everyone later.
See you guys. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.